didn't cry the day they handed me the dress. Maybe I should have, maybe a part of me even wanted to, but I didn't. I just held that plain, beige fabric in my hands and nodded like a good daughter does, or, in my case, a stepdaughter. The forgotten one. The one who's always standing off to the side while someone else gets the flashbulbs and champagne. Maribel, my stepsister, was spinning in a gown that probably cost more than my tuition should have. It sparkled like a chandelier had exploded and stitched itself back together just for her. Celia, my stepmother, was clapping like it was opening night. On Broadway, "You're the jewel of this family," she whispered to Maribel. I was holding my dress, a shade of oatmeal that made cardboard look rich, and trying not to choke on how obvious the setup was. There was no lace, no veil, not even a hanger with my name on it. "You'll be in the background, darling," Celia said, turning to me with that sugar-laced steel tone. Nothing too ambitious. She smoothed my shoulder as if she owned me, and maybe in a way, she thought she did. That night, I laid the dress flat on the end of my bed and stared at it, like it might explain itself. It didn't. 2 days later, she summoned me into the study, the one that used to belong to my dad. Now it was all polished glass and locked drawers. She didn't even look up, just poured herself something golden in a crystal glass and said, "Your mother left debts in Niel, ugly ones." I blinked. My mother died when I was 12. That debt had been buried with her. But Celia tapped a folder like she was reading off a weather report. Turns out her estate wasn't cleared. We've been carrying her obligations, quietly, until now. And then came the twist. Callum has a claim. I laughed before I could stop myself. Callum, the gatekeeper, the guy who hands off mail and opens the side gate for deliveries? But Celia didn't laugh. There was an arrangement. His family helped yours, there's paperwork, and a promise. That word, promise, made me feel like the walls were closing in. "You're joking," I said. "You're the only one without prospects," she replied, her tone too casual. "Maribel is engaged to the Langley heir. Well, you've always preferred quiet, haven't you?" She said it like solitude was a defect. Then came the final blow. "You'll marry him. It's settled." I left before I could throw something. I walked the garden path until the gravel felt like it was scraping the skin off my feet. I called my father. No answer. Called again. Voicemail. The house loomed behind me, huge and hollow. I walked through the rose garden my mother once loved, now dead stems and thorns, a perfect metaphor for what remained of her memory here. I knelt in the dirt and let the silence say what no one else would. I was disposable. The wedding wasn't mine. Not really. Maribel had the chandeliers and the imported orchids. I got a legal ceremony. Under a collapsing gazebo behind the house. No music, no vows, just a clerk and 2 bored witnesses scribbling on a clipboard. Callum stood beside me in a suit that looked borrowed and eyes that didn't blink. "You have no idea who I am," he said quietly, as I said, "I do." And I didn't. That was the terrifying part. That night, I wasn't brought back to the main house. I was escorted to a tiny cottage near the stables. The gardener's quarters, long abandoned, a thin mattress, 1 cracked mirror. No closet, just 2 hooks and a chipped teacup on the nightstand. They'd married me off, then stored me like luggage. I woke up to toast and tea with no note. The silence was louder than rejection. Later that morning, I stepped out into the dew-soaked grass, the sound of Maribel's string quartet echoing from the far lawn. There she was in her second dress, posing like royalty. Celia kissed her cheek like it was her own coronation. Not once did anyone look for me. Not once did anyone ask if I was okay. When I approached the side porch, Celia appeared, like clockwork. "Darling," she cooed, blocking the door. "Let's not confuse the guests." "I live here," I said quietly. She tilted her head. "You stay here, that's different." That night, I wandered into the study. The lights were off. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed proof that I had existed. I found a folder near the fireplace. Documents spilled out like someone had been sloppy or too drunk to care. Tucked beneath was a legal envelope from Benson & Associates. I opened it. Inside, the contract I'd supposedly signed, but this one had a clause highlighted. My eyes scanned it, heart pounding. Upon legal marriage to a Mali heir, all estate rights shall revert to the biological Mali descendant. My mother's maiden name. My name. Everything suddenly snapped into place like shattered glass reforming. They didn't marry me off to protect the family. They married me off to unlock it. I stumbled back to the cottage and found Callum sitting on the steps like he'd been waiting. I handed him the contract. "I know who I am," I said. He nodded. "You're not just the forgotten girl." "And I'm not just the gatekeeper." Then came his final words, slow and deliberate. "They'll wish I was." The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter drifting in through the cracked window of the cottage. It wasn't mine. It never was. In the distance, someone popped a champagne cork, probably Maribel's brunch guests, toasting to her new last name, while I sat alone under a fraying quilt, married to a man I didn't know, holding a legal contract that changed everything. It wasn't just a contract, it was leverage. And in this house, leverage was more powerful than love. By mid-morning, a text went out to the family group thread. "Breakfast celebration for our Maribel in her next chapter, dining hall. 9 a.m. sharp." I wasn't on the list. Of course I wasn't. But Callum had sent me a screenshot. No words, just the image, a subtle invitation. Or a test. I showed up wearing navy. Not black, not beige, navy. The same shade my mother used to wear when she had something to say but wanted to be taken seriously. My hair pulled back tight, no makeup, no jewelry. Just the documents tucked inside a leather folder Callum had given me the night before. At the entrance to the dining hall, Celia saw me before anyone else. Her smile flickered, then vanished. "Niall, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. I glanced around, voice steady. "It's a family breakfast." "You weren't invited," she snapped. Callum stepped forward, now wearing a pressed button-down and no jacket to label him staff. He didn't raise his voice, didn't break a sweat. "She's family, she belongs here." The room went quiet. "You know that sound? The one you hear in a courtroom right before a verdict?" That's what this was. Maribel's cousins, all dressed in linen and pearls, froze mid-sip. Someone's fork clinked against porcelain. I stepped forward, pulled out the folder, and laid it gently in front of Mr. Benson, the estate attorney who hadn't looked me in the eye since I was a teenager. "This needs to be read," I said. He blinked like I'd just spoken Latin. Then he opened the folder. The first page made his lips tighten. "This," he cleared his throat, "this appears to be a clause from the original Malai estate, valid, signed, and witnessed. It states that upon marriage to a legal Malai heir, the estate reverts to the bride and spouse jointly." Celia laughed sharply. "That's ridiculous. Niall married a groundskeeper." Callum took a breath. "I was adopted by Nathaniel Malley, legally, 2 years before he passed." Benson nodded. "That is correct. We have record of the adoption." Additionally, he flipped to the next page. "This is a will, dated before any recent alterations. It was never voided. It names Niall as the primary heir if she fulfills the condition of marrying a Malley descendant." The room cracked open like a thunderclap. "This is a setup!" Celia screamed, but nobody moved to back her up. Even Maribel looked unsure now, fingers frozen around her champagne flute. "You forged my mother's documents," I said quietly. "You erased her name from her own estate, and now you're upset the fine print didn't forget me." Celia's eyes locked on Callum. "You lied. You tricked me." He shrugged. "No. You just never thought anyone would read the fine print." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there and let the silence prove my point. Later that afternoon, I sat in the study again. Same chair, same desk. Only this time, no one stopped me. It felt surreal. This place that once dismissed me like background noise was suddenly silent, watching me like I mattered. I opened a drawer. Inside were old files, brittle letters, invoices with Celia's signature. Money moved around like puzzle pieces. Some labeled discretionary gift, others consultant fee. But the most damning file was labeled simply, Guardianship Transfer, Hastings. It was Callum's file. I flipped through it slowly. A contract from when he was just 11. His father had signed over his rights to Celia in exchange for a stipend, a promise to get clean, according to the cover letter. He died 3 weeks later. Callum didn't choose this. He'd been drafted into it, groomed, just like me. Later that night, I stepped out of the cottage and found Callum leaning against the fence, arms crossed. "You knew," I said. "I found the file 6 months ago," he admitted. "I didn't know how to tell you. I tried." I shook my head. "And you still let them marry me." "I didn't think you'd fall for me," he said. "I didn't mean for you to." "But I did." His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the boy behind the comm, the boy who was used like a pawn and told he was lucky to even be on the board. "I didn't lie to hurt you," he said. "I lied because I was scared of what would happen if I told the truth too soon." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I also wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. Back inside, I found a letter slipped under the door. "No sender, just my name in sharp black ink. Inside, one line. Your mother tried to protect you. There's more you haven't seen. Call me." The signature, Ara, a name I hadn't heard since I was 9, a name whispered once at night by my mother when she thought I was asleep. A secret. A sister? I stared at the paper until the ink blurred. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about bloodlines, power, and women like my mother who were buried long before they ever died. And maybe, finally, it was about to be undone. The call came at 6:42 a.m. "Nail?" the voice asked softly. I recognized it instantly, the kind of familiarity that doesn't come from memory but from blood. It was Era. "I knew your mother," she said, "but more importantly, I know what they stole, and I know where they hid it." She didn't ask if I believed her. She didn't need to. By noon I was in my car, a dusty rental from a backlot in Charleston, heading north. The road curved like an old story unraveling. I hadn't told Callum. Not yet. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure who he was in this story anymore. Pawn? Partner? Problem? Maybe all three. When I pulled up to the university archives, the sky was the color of steel. The air smelled like mildew and static. Era had sent instructions. Ask for the Lennox box. Code Reflow 11. I stepped into the reading room. The librarian blinked at the code, then disappeared behind a rolling wall of shelves. When she came back, she was holding a small canvas-wrapped crate. Dust clung to the edges. Inside were letters, real ones, typed on thin onion skin paper, yellowed by time, creased with care. Each was signed, MM, in faded ink. Miranda Molly. My mother. She had been writing to someone named Nora. A caretaker. A friend? Maybe a lifeline? In one letter she warned, "They'll marry her off to a boy who doesn't know he's bait. They'll call it honor, but it's ownership." In another, "Celia forged Everett's consent to remove Nail from the will, but I kept one clean copy. It's in the orchard vault, left of the old rose trellis." That was the moment I stopped breathing. There was a vault? At the estate? I flipped deeper into the stack. Tucked at the bottom, a photograph. Me, at maybe 5 years old, wearing my grandfather's oversized coat. Grinning with a missing front tooth. Behind me, partially buried in the hedge, was a rusted door, barely visible. The orchard vault. I drove back that night. No headlights, no GPS, just instinct. I reached the orchard at dusk, the grass wet with evening fog, and there it was. The metal panel behind the climbing roses. It took everything in me not to scream when I pried it open. Inside was a stone stairwell. I descended into darkness, guided only by flashlight and desperation. The vault wasn't large, a concrete room with metal shelves. On the top shelf, wrapped in faded silk, a box. Inside it, a sealed affidavit. I read it once, then again. In the event of my death or disappearance, my daughter Niall Royce Malley shall inherit all properties tied to the Lennox Malley estate. This claim supersedes any will signed under duress or false medical pretenses. Below it, my mother's signature. Real, not forged, stamped, dated, legal. I didn't cry, not right away. I folded the affidavit and placed it inside a plastic sleeve, then tucked it beneath my coat. As I climbed the stairs, I heard footsteps outside. Fast. Heavy. I paused. A flashlight beam swept the grass. Then a voice. "Niall, you in there?" It was Callum. I stepped out slowly, hands visible, affidavit tight to my chest. "What are you doing here?" I asked. His face was pale. "I followed your car. I didn't know where you were going, but when you didn't call..." He trailed off. I looked at him. Really looked. No jacket, no badge, no lies, just a man who used to be a pawn and was trying to be something else. "I found it," I said. He nodded. "I know," he said. "So did they." "What?" Before he could explain, a second flashlight beam cut across the orchard. Voices! 2, maybe 3. Callum grabbed my arm. "Run." We didn't argue. We ran, through the orchard, past the fountain, behind the stables, until we reached the side gate. When we burst onto the gravel road, panting and soaked with sweat, I turned to him. "You knew they were coming." "I got a text from Ara," he said, gasping. "They found the leak. They're trying to shut everything down, but it's too late." He looked at me then, and for once, I believed him. The next morning, we stood on courthouse steps again. Same cameras, different story. I wore gray, he wore black. The affidavit sat in a laminated sleeve. Under my arm, when the judge read it aloud in court, Celia didn't speak, neither did Ara. They just sat there, tight-lipped, small, uninvited. I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge. "I'm not asking for revenge," I said. "I'm asking for restoration, not just for me, for my mother, for every woman who's been told she's just background noise in a legacy built on her silence." The room was quiet. Then, the gavel struck. And it was done. The estate returned, the name restored, the silence broken. 3 months later, I turned the estate into something else. Not a hotel. Not a private club. Not a museum to dead money. But a place where silenced women could reclaim their voices. The house became a legal center. The dining room, a co-op kitchen. The library, a workshop for women writing their stories. On the lawn, where Celia once posed for press photos, we planted a plaque. Brushed bronze, plain, powerful, in honor of Miranda Malley and the daughters who refused to stay erased. One afternoon, as golden light fell through the camellia branches, a little girl from one of the shelters ran up to me. She held out a drawing. Stick figures. Hearts. Stars. "You look like a queen," she said. I crouched down and smiled. "I used to feel like a ghost," I said. "What's a ghost?" she asked. I paused. "Someone people try to forget." "Did they forget you?" "Not anymore." She grinned and ran off, and I watched her disappear into a world where no one would silence her name, not if I had anything to say about it.